Good morning is midweek edition of your breakfast from Leadership Television inside Nigeria. My name is Unifor, your host on the program. And all too soon, today is the last Wednesday of the month of January. Of course, today's date is Wednesday, 28th of January 2026. We heads up to our newspaper review corner where we have some selected newspapers for review this Wednesday. And of course, on topping the review list is Nigeria's most influential newspaper, Leadership. Leadership's leading story today says Diezani received £100,000 in cash as bribe, UK prosecutor. Of course, Diezani was the Minister of Petroleum Resources during Goodluck Ebele Jonathan's presidency. Diezani received £100,000 in cash as bribe, UK prosecutor. We heads up to page 4 where the story continues to get some excerpts from that leading story. The prosecutor, Alexandra Haley, in the ongoing trial of former Petroleum Minister Diezani Alisi Madueke on Tuesday, told the Crown Court in Southwark, England, that the ex-minister accepted bribes from industry figures seeking lucrative oil and gas contracts in Nigeria. Haley, who was addressing the jury at the opening session of the trial, also claimed that Alisi Madueke received £100,000, that is about $137,680 in cash, as well as accepting flights on private jets, chauffeur-driven cars, and luxury goods from Louis Vuitton and Harrods. The 65-year-old former minister was arraigned before the court on a 5-count charge of accepting bribes and an additional count of conspiracy to commit bribery relating to her tenure as Nigeria's Minister for Petroleum Resources from 2010 to 2015 under the Goodluck Jonathan administration. Alisi Madueke is accused of accepting financial or other advantages from individuals linked to the Atlantic Energy and SPOG petrochemical groups between 2011 and 2015. She was arraigned before Judge Michael Snow alongside oil industry executive Olatimbo Ayinde and her brother, 69-year-old Doye Agama, on bribery charges related to the case. These are excerpts from today's leading story on Leadership newspaper. Diezani received £100,000 in cash as bribe coming from the UK prosecutor. We go back to the cover, the newspaper cover, to review other stories gracing the cover. Central Bank grants too much from M relief to importers. Presidency dismisses concerns over Tinubu's tumble in Turkey. Who prioritize Electoral Act Constitution Amendments 2026 budgets coming from the House of Representatives. And in the news, 2027, Atiku will be seek free and fair polls as Aregbesola dismisses governance defections. Kwankwaso begins restructuring Kwankwasia movement after Yusuf's exit. NDLEA unveils crop substitution project for illicit cannabis farmers. That story is on page 21 of Leadership. Of course, don't forget that the NDLEA chief executive, Marwa, did say yesterday that about 15 million Nigerians were on drugs. And today's story says, the agency NDLEA unveils crop substitution project for illicit cannabis farmers. On the business boss of Leadership this Wednesday, federal government raises 501 billion naira bond, settles 421.42 billion naira power sector debts. Business story on the cover of Leadership. And atop the masthead, as we are doing already countdown to Leadership Conference and awards. And of course, Kuka, the Catholic Bishop of Sokoto Diocese, Most Reverend Matthew Hassan Kuka, is expected to chair the 18th edition of the Leadership Conference and Award ceremony scheduled for 12 February 2026 at the Bola Tinubu International Conference Center in Abuja. Kuka, recognized as one of Nigeria's most accomplished public intellectuals, is also a scholar and advocate for social justice. He has confirmed his ability to chair the conference themed Political Stability and Sustainable Development in Africa in an increasingly unstable global system, a roadmap to Nigeria. The keynote address will be delivered by Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Dr. Amina Mohammed. Of course, the conference awards, Leadership Conference and Awards, promises to be an eventful and also instructive conference awards with this keynote speaker and the chairman of the event. From the cover of leadership, we heads up to the page 3 where we have our stand. Today's stand is on the prison overcrowding crisis. Today's stands in leadership. Our stand, of course, the newspaper stand. Like I always mention and explain, the editorial. In some papers, you have editorial, they call it editorial. And our stand, some you have a view or some commentary. It's actually the collegiate, the aggregate view, the stand of the paper for the day. And of course, every other paper carry editorial every day. Today's stand, today's view, today's editorial in leadership says the prison overcrowding crisis. From our stand, we goes briskly to the back page of the paper where we have Wednesday column with Olufunke Barowa. And today she's writing on the world as we know it is over. The world as we know it is over. Today's Wednesday column with Olufunke Barowa. We'll take some quotes from that column. The world as we once understood it has ended, and what replaces it is unsettled, contested, and volatile. In a world of shifting power and shrinking consensus, foreign policy can no longer be ceremonial. It must be strategic, economically grounded, and unapologetically interest-driven. Today's column with Olufunke Barowa. And before we leave, exit the back page, we visit Ghana Must Go. SCCI says recurrent grid collapses threaten manufacturing as MSMEs. And Ghana Must Go replied, this grid safe, not try actually. Is on that note, we conclude review of leadership this Wednesday. For more, log into the website of leadership. We heads up to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is The Punch. The Punch is still on the developing story of alleged coup plotters. Today's cover story says investigation uncovers Corner who plotted Tinubu's ouster. Interim report reveals military officers targeted president, VP, ministers, and key installations. Arrest ongoing. Today's a developing story on the Punch newspaper on the alleged coup plot. The Punch says investigation uncovers Corner who plotted Tinubu's ouster. Interim report reveals military officers targeted president, VP, ministers, and key installations. Arrest ongoing. Presidency downplays Tinubu's tumble, says Turkey visit on course. Of course, we have the picture of President Bola Tinubu on an official visit to Turkey yesterday, and it's also expecting guides of honor mounted on his behalf. Wike threatens workers as court orders strike suspension. How I lost 3-week-old daughter to Makoko demolition. Carpenter. I lost 3-week-old daughter to Makoko demolition. Carpenter is also the same story too. This Kumi Wali abduction. One of the victims lost her 3-week-old baby to the abduction. But however, in this instance is on the Makoko demolition. The Carpenter says how I lost 3-week-old daughter to Makoko demolition. So Warren's trial court admits a mockery clip calling Tinubu drug lord. And that takes us to the stories up just beside the masthead and atop the masthead of the Punch. Tinubu proposes 110 Court of Appeal justices. Why discos blame low generation as grid collapses third time. And that concludes review of the Punch newspaper this Wednesday. For more, log into the website of Punch newspaper. The next paper for review on today's segment is Blueprint newspaper. Blueprint's leading story says with 501 billion naira per debt bond fully subscribed, federal government closes first tranche of 4 trillion naira issuance program. Is decisive reset of electricity market vehicle. Confidence restored, we unlock investments additional. 2027 Nigerians ready, ADC in competition, not cooperation, Bolaji Abdullahi. Mark force the loyalists on doctrine of necessity, why I wrote the book as minister. Mark fought the loyalists on doctrine of necessity. As minister says, why I wrote the book. Still on the Blueprint newspaper, EFCC arraigns as national coordinator NEDC over 2.2 billion naira fraud. EFCC arraigns as national coordinator NEDC over 2.2 billion naira fraud. We are targeting $5 billion trade volume with Nigeria, Erdogan. Again, Kanu's transfer bid from Sokoto prison suffers setback. And the strip says police nab five baby factory operators, 17 rustlers, recover 558 cattle in Ekiti. Police nab 5 baby factory operators, 17 rustlers, recover 558 cattle in Ekiti. We move to the masthead of Blueprint newspaper. Tinubu proposes 110 appeal court justices virtual hearings. Federal government backs customs reforms, comment services, border vigilance. Super Eagles captain Ndidi loses father in road crash. APC destination for believers in United Nigeria, Shetima. Tinubu Shetima ticket best for 2027 coming from Sule. APC destination for believers in United Nigeria, Shetima. And we move towards the masthead, above the masthead of Blueprint. Lagos Fire Service force suicide, rescues 84-year-old man from well. Lagos Fire Service force suicide, rescues 84-year-old man from where. And that brings to a close the review of front headline stories on Blueprint newspaper this Wednesday. For more, log into www.blueprint.ng. We move ahead to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is Daily Sun. Daily Sun says Atiku Aregbesola knocked Tinubu. His government was than military dictatorship coming from former VP. Governors can't say president, APC in 2027 as Osun governor. While we are offering sustainable livelihoods to illicit cannabis growers, Marwa, same leading story on leadership. However, leadership says NDLE unveils crop substitution project for illicit cannabis farmers. Marwa says while we are offering sustainable livelihoods to illicit cannabis growers. Strike, I won't succumb to blackmail. Wiki OK's 12 billion naira for January salaries, threatens to sanction any worker who refuses to resume work. Tinubu asked Senate to approve 40 more Court of Appeal justices, 24 High Court. 6 amendments to Federal High Court Act. Kaduna bandits raise ransom to 250 million naira, 20 motorcycles to free 166 worshippers. Lastly, on the cover of Daily Sun, court strikes out Kanu's motion seeking transfer from Sokoto prison. For more, log into www.thesun.ng. From the Sun, we move over to the next paper, and that is Vanguard. Vanguard says federal government, northern leaders, lawyers differ on amnesty for terrorists. Today's Wednesday, January 28th edition of Vanguard newspaper. Federal government, northern leaders, lawyers differ on amnesty for terrorists. Governors have powers to grant such amnesty if coming from AGF. They can't grant amnesty offenses under federal laws coming from lawyers. ACF, CNG, CAN, MBF, Muslim clerics, others disagree. Say Amnesty International will compound insecurity in region. These are kickers to the leading story on today's Vanguard newspaper, and the story continues on page 5 of the paper. Federal government, northern leaders, lawyers differ on amnesty for terrorists. 2027, APC leaders receive Mutwang, offer him automatic tickets. Osun local government tenure dispute at Deleke APC trade wars. Bandits key to abduct over 50 women in Katsina community. Terrorists demand 250 million naira, 20 motorcycles ransom from Kaguru church victims. Demand 100 million naira for abducted pregnant woman, nursing mother in Ekiti. Federal government raises 501 billion naira from bond market to settle Genco's debt. Adepoju, Lawa, Hey Super Eagles new team spirit. Ankara, despite fall, Tinubu is in great shape coming from presidency, reacting to the viral video of President Tinubu stumbling in Turkey. Despite fall, Tinubu's great shape coming from presidency. World Bank offers 250 billion naira dollars procurement window to Nigerian firms. 2027 polls won't be decided by incumbency, Atiku, Obi, Aregbesola, others. SCCI orders lament losses as national grid collapses again. And lastly, on the cover of Vanguard newspaper, customs duty violation, court orders for feature of private aircraft to federal government. And that brings to a close the review of Vanguard newspaper this Wednesday. For more, log into the website of Vanguard, www.vanguardngr.com. From Vanguard, we move to the last paper we have on our lineup this Wednesday, and of course, that paper is The Nation. The Nation's leading story says Nigeria Turkey target $5 billion trade pact against insurgency. 9 bilateral agreements signed, Joint Economy and Trade Committee established. 12 outstanding teachers get 355 million naira cash award. And the second leading story on today is The Nation. Motuan's defection reaffirms APC as truly national party, says Shetima. President Oke's work on Akwanga/Jos Road, hiring of 1,000 forest guards. Court strikes at application seeking transfer of Kanu from Sokoto prison. That story is on page 4 of The Nation. World Bank gives conditions for states to access loans. Tax, banks can debit account without owner's consent. That is a cherry news. Tax, banks can debit account without owner's consent. That story continues on page 6 of The Nation newspaper. Tax, banks can't debit account without owner's consent. And on the last boss, on the cover of The Nation, just beneath the masthead, judge returns Malami's interim forfeiture case file to CJ. Mieti Allah leader arrested over banditry in Kwara. And that concludes the review of front headline stories on The Nation newspaper this Wednesday. For more, log into the website of The Nation for more stories. It's on this note, viewers, we've come to the end of today's Inside Nigeria, where we have reviewed some national papers and their cover stories. My name is Winifred Ogwebo. I look forward to having you same time, same station tomorrow for another fresh edition of the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for watching. For sponsorship and advert placements, please contact 080-3688-6158. Last Word Leadership Podcast Studio. You have the last word.